Okay guys, we're going to do real simple multiplayer projectiles. The projectile is going to be spawned on the server and then replicated across the network. The client inputs fire, the server spawns and replicates. Very simple process. So here we're in the editor. I'm playing as client. I have two clients up. And let me tab over to this guy. Real simple. Real simple process. I'm having the server draw out the debugs on the hits. Very simple process. Let me show you how I'm running this on the editor. New editor window. Two players. Net mode. Display as client. And the multiplayer options. We're going to launch a separate server. So that's that. As far as the code on the client for this demo, this is it. Input action, fire, switch as authority. We only want the client to call this. So when the client presses, he's remote. He calls the run on server event, server fire. Server fire, notice switch as authority. Verifying it's the authority. We're going to calculate the spawn transform. Pass that off to spawning the projectile, which uses projectile movement component. Now I have the initial velocity down here, so that's just going to be your muzzle velocity. So you set that up. I have it a low value so you can see them things. For the projectile itself, it's a simple setup. We want to replicate movement, and we want to replicate. Pretty basic stuff here. We have the collision set up, and for the mesh, there's no collision on the mesh, and the movement is set up to just use initial speed instead of velocity. You can use one or the other, but let me highlight this. Initial speed of projectile, if greater than 0, this will override the initial velocity value. Instead, treat velocity as direction. So x being 1 is forward. What's my velocity? So that's how we're running that, and the way that I do this is in the construction script. I have my custom variable, and we're going to set the initial speed, which is this value, and we're going to set the max speed, which is this value, to whatever is being passed in. So whatever you pass to this in the construction script, it's going to set it. So on spawn, whatever you're passing through, that's what it'll have, and boom, your projectile takes off. So it's a pretty simple setup. Back in here, I want to look at the transform. So how we're generating the transform, because we're on the server, you're not going to be able to get a rotation out of camera. And this is how I set up all my projectiles so that they cross the center of the screen. So basically your crosshairs, you want them to intersect your crosshairs. So for rotation, we have to get the controller, get control rotation, then forward vector, and then we're going to multiply that for distance down range. And then we get the location of the camera. We're going to run a line trace. And that line trace is going to come out, and this is where you would do your socket, your muzzle socket. I have a fake socket on my character, that little ball. It's just a fake socket for this example. But typically you would get your mesh, your gun mesh, and then get socket location, and then do all this. So if we have an impact point, so our line trace hits something directly in front of us, that's where we want our projectile to actually hit, or at least aim at the direction of movement. That's where we want it to go towards. Otherwise, we shoot it downrange towards the trace end. Trace end, trace end. That's that simple. When we make a transform out of this, we pass it. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. And hopefully that covers everything. Only thing I'm doing in the event graph on the projectile is I'm setting a lifespan on begin play, 5 seconds, and then I'm just doing some basic, very basic here, draw a debug point of where the impacts, and then destroy the actor. The only other thing that I would note here is for client-side effects, you would run them off this line on remote. So your muzzle flash, sound, animation, etc. You would run that right here. Pretty straightforward.